Couple things you need to consider in terms of how long should your practice session be. One is the physical side of things, but there's also the mental side of things where you're going to have diminishing returns because you're just mentally not focused enough to be able to practice what you're working on. On the mental side of things, Pomodoro technique, a set amount of time where you practice and then a set amount of time where you take a break. I like to do 50 minutes and 10 minutes when I'm either practicing or if I'm like writing stuff like scripts, doing academic work, like 50 minutes of research, 10 minutes of like walking on the treadmill or meditating or stretching or anything other than the thing that I was just doing. So when you're practicing, if you set those like 25 and 5 or 50 minutes and 10-minute breaks, every cycle of this, you come back mentally kind of like hitting F5, the refresh button on your brain. So that way you can practice for longer by taking those little breaks. But on the physical side of things, when you start to get to the repetitive stress issues, what you can do is instead of practicing like something fast is you can slow things down and refine things. If you front load more cognitively and physically demanding practice stuff to the start of your day and then make it so that you gradually get to easier things, I will front load the stuff that is harder, the thing that I need to work on most at the beginning of a practice session. By the end of it, I'll just be like, okay, I'm gonna like either chop out at the end or work on some endurance stuff at the end or just refine my technique at the end. It doesn't require as much cognitive capacity, etc. The amount of time that you put into practicing is really dependent on, again, the physical side and the mental side of things. But you can actually extend that over time. So on the mental side of things, attention training, like meditation processes can actually help you to make it so that you are more focused when you are practicing for extended periods of time. On the physical side of things, the more you practice each day, the longer you'll be able to go. So some people will say, well, I can't really get more than 2 hours of practicing in before my hands give out. But then you look at like rudimental drummers like myself, and we'd be drumming all day, every day. Like we'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and have like sticks in our hands immediately, and we wouldn't stop until like 10 o'clock at night or whatever. So we'd literally be drumming all day, every single day. And it was something that we built up over time. So that endurance, whether it's the mental or the physical side of things, can be expanded. Maybe you can only focus for 30 minutes right now and get like 30 minutes in. Next week, try and push yourself to 35 minutes and try and get like just 10%, a little bit more in there. Over time, over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years, etc., then you can make it so that you can practice significantly longer. So like when I was first learning limb independent stuff and I was going through this, I was spending at least 10 hours a day on it. And the reason why I was able to do that is because I had already done drum corps for several years and used to practicing all day, every day, basically. But I was taking those like 10-minute breaks in there to help with this shift between different things. So in your groups of practicing, doing the Pomodoro stuff, so if you're doing like 50 minutes and then 10 minutes, have that first chunk be on one thing and then have the next chunk be on a completely different thing. It could be a different instrument, or it could just be like, I'm gonna work on limb independence for like an hour, and then I'm gonna work on technique for an hour. And then you just might like cycle back and forth between the two, or switch to like a new thing each time when you're doing this. So that can kind of like help to keep things fresh. So that way you're not just like sitting there and, well, I did like 10 hours on one thing during the day. That might get tedious and you'll start to lose that focus. And I say this as somebody who like was not able to do that initially. So when I first started practicing, like 10 minutes of practicing was like an accomplishment. And then eventually became 30 minutes, and then it became an hour, and then it became like all day, every day. That became the eventual thing. Metaphorically speaking, it's like a muscle that you can improve over time if you continue to push yourself to be able to get just like a little bit more focused or a little bit longer in terms of how long you're able to practice and get your hands going. So if you're working on like double bass or something and you get tired with your legs, cool. Then switch over to working on pad stuff with your hands. Just keep shifting to new different things for each chunk of practice session that you're working on whenever you get either physically or mentally exhausted from working on that. Another thing that you can do on the physical side of things to make it so that your like hands get less tired, I will do endurance related stuff at the end of my practice sessions. The sticks that I use in all of those rudimental streams are actually the Hardeman hammers, which are like extra heavy chopsticks, and they're double taped. So they're like 44% heavier than normal marching sticks that are double taped. So they're extra heavy, extra good for working on endurance. And I've played with them for years to the point where like I don't even notice the fact that they're extra heavy sticks. So when I get to these drum set sticks, these feel like nothing because I built up that endurance over time. But when I first started using those heavy sticks, like it was like, what? How do I do this? There's a video that can help you with recovering after extended periods of practice. Inside of the drumming lessons playlist, there's a video that's called What to Do 10 Minutes, 1 Hour, and 5 Hours After Drumming. So when this says do this after drumming, it might have a different title because I'm technically doing a title A/B test right now. But inside of here, it's got some different tips on like some different things that you can do immediately after you practice, as well as like some foods that you should eat that can help your brain to be able to process whatever it is that you're working on. Omegas are really good for your brain to be able to like learn things and to recover from learning. But also some of the things that I talk about are like some different stretches that you can do to be able to improve your recovery, and then elevating both your hands and your legs to be able to improve your recovery, but also icing and possibly even heating and alternating between those. So this video can help out with that. And again, this is in the drumming lessons playlist that is my home tab of YouTube. You can find that under the tips and lessons section, past all the thousands of play alongs and whatnot inside of here. Before I get to the next tip, I just want to say really quickly that you can find literally thousands of hours of free drumming play alongs and drumming tips in the link at the top of the description, or by going into my home tab of YouTube. You can approach any instrument with a set of intentionality that will help you to improve. So the way that I approach a marching, like tenor drums or snare drums or whatever, is the same way that I approach like marimba. I'll focus on the harder thing at the beginning, and then I will sequence it so that it gets easier throughout. As my attention and like physical exhaustion gets worse, it slowly moves to easier things as I'm going. So I won't start with like, I'm just gonna work on scales for the next hour. Like that's a boring thing. Or I'm gonna like memorize different chord progressions or whatever. That's a really tedious thing. I'm gonna save that for the end of that. Front loading the harder stuff to the easier stuff is something that you can apply to anything. But in terms of like the amount of time that you spend on different areas is gonna be very different depending on the instrument. On my home tab of YouTube, what I normally recommend if you're in drumline to spend like 50 to 60% of your time on these technique exercises. So that way you can play consistently, and that consistency makes it so that you can play clean with the rest of the line. For the next chunk of time, what I recommend is like 30 to 40% of your time is on grid variations, just specifically focusing on rudiment on one. You can eventually get into the wackier stuff, but rudiment on one with triplet and 16th note will go a long way for the basic rudiments like diddles, flams, flam drags, cheeses, flam fives. If you do those, you'll be great. And then 10, at most 20% of your time is on the chop stuff. So this is what I recommend for like a typical rudimental drummer. But for drum kit, I wouldn't recommend spending time on like shopping sprees and grid variations. Maybe you'll work on it with like diddles or with sticking, but like you don't really need to learn how to do grid with the flam 5 to be able to play on drum kit. Like those kind of rudiments are just above and beyond what is necessary on here. And even with the technique stuff, like they can help with your hands, but there's often more time spent on coordination than there is spent necessarily on technique. Like if you look at a lot of drumming YouTubers out there who are like really well known for playing on drum kit, they sound great, but their hands, if they were on a snare line, they'd be cut because like their hands are super inconsistent. It doesn't look good. It doesn't sound good. It's very tight sound quality. But when you're the only person playing, it's fine, but you can't get away with that when you're on a drum line. It kind of depends on the instrument. With marimba, you need to work on some limb independence. Like if you're playing an ostinato in the right hand versus something else in the left hand, like that is some limb independent stuff you need to work on. But with marching snare drum, the only time that I really needed to know any kind of limb independent stuff was for one specific exercise that Murray Gussick had us do at the Vanguard auditions that I went to in 2005. Outside of that, never did any limb independent stuff with that, so it's not something to practice. So what you need to figure out is like, when you're practicing, what is the most important thing that you need to work on, and then kind of prioritize your time percentage-wise and front load that to work on that. So if you want to improve on drum kit, maybe the majority of your time is spent on the limb independent stuff, and then the next thing that you work on is technique stuff. But for rudimental, it's going to be more spending more of your time working on technique and then grid variations, and then you're probably not even going to touch like limb independence, etc. So every instrument's going to be different, and you'll just have to experiment with it. And there are times where like I've worked on some things more than others, whether it's technique or chops or whatever, in order to try and improve on the different instruments. Like there was a time where I was doing a ton of sight reading stuff like every day, where I'd read through stuff for like 30 minutes to an hour just so I can improve my sight reading, whether it was on like marching snare drum or sight reading to get better at like sight reading 4 mallet parts. It comes down to what you need to work on as an individual to improve, but also the type of music that you're playing to improve.